All right, guys, we're back into team previews here today. It's Wednesday on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Vespris, rocking my party animal shirt today. I am a freaking party animal today because after a week of sleeping on the couch, my wife has finally tested negative for COVID, so I can sleep in a bed again tonight. The construction next door continues to rattle my brain. I'm going to lose it. My brain, that is. First, it was jackhammering. Now it's something else. This is interminable. And I just wait. All day I wait. Try to find a pocket. And then as soon as I set everything up, it's like, now we got the next fun noise. But anyway, we got a show to do. So bleep it. Today, we're talking Thunder and Nuggets. Or Nuggets and Thunder. Sounds exciting. Sounds like a nice afternoon out on the front porch in the Midwest in summer. Just having some Nuggets, watching some Thunder. There are a couple of pressing questions, I would say, about the fantasy ramifications of what these two teams have done in the offseason. We'll try to mostly focus on those. Quick reminder, everybody, if you're joining us at the beginning here, take a moment to hit the like button. Please subscribe. Drop that 5-star review. That, of course, goes a long way towards getting us back where we want to be at some point, somewhere near where I was on the old feed. I'm Dan Vespris at Dan Vespris, DanBesbris, and the overall network is at Old Man Squad. Make sure to follow them. You'll get all the updates as shows drop, not just mine, but the other hosts, the other shows on the network as well. We're going to start with the Nuggets today because I basically flipped a coin and it came up Nuggets. And I think you all know basically where we're going with this. The Nuggets pretty much did one swapperoo this offseason. Just one. KCP is in Orlando now. And they brought in Russell Westbrook. Reggie Jackson is also gone, by the way. So if you're playing the who gets to do what game, and obviously not everything is going to stay exactly constant, Christian Braun is expected to slide into KCP's starting job. Brown last year played 20 minutes per game. He was number 299 in 9 category leagues. Did manage to play all 82 games, so good for him on that front. But from a strict fantasy standpoint, Christian Braun doesn't have any. Let's just assume, for argument's sake, that he slides into whatever the usage was that KCP had before. Caldwell Pope took 7.7 shots, managed to turn that into fantasy value right around the edge of the top 100. He was number 105 last year, which is, like 9th round? Generally startable, if but barely, in most formats. But the reason he was able to get there is because KCP is an extraordinary foul shooter, 89% last year. He's a very good 3-and-D type, 1.6 threes, 1.9 combined defensive stats. In about 2/3 the number of minutes last year, Brown hit 0.8 threes, so extrapolate that to about 1.2, and had 0.9 defensive stats. You could extrapolate that to about 1.3, 1.3.5, something along those lines. So those numbers just really aren't even remotely close to what Caldwell Pope put up. The one area where Brown would have an advantage would be rebounding. He was at 3.7 last year in 20 minutes. So again, you add another 50% on top of that, you get to about 5.5. Okay, fine. What about the other problems here? Well, both guys shot exactly 46% from the field, so you can assume that'll translate relatively well. But Brown was sub 70% at the free throw line, and now suddenly is staring down the barrel of taking over 2 free throws a ball game. That becomes a pretty large negative. Brown has, in my eyes, almost no shot of becoming a standard league startable fantasy player, and I am not even using a late round flyer on him. Let's talk superstar. No, let's not do that. Let's talk Aaron Gordon for a minute, because by all accounts, Aaron Gordon is doing about as much as you could possibly hope and still doesn't have what you'd call traditional 9 category value. He has value in certain builds because he's basically a punt free throw guy at 3.7 foul shots per game and 66% at the free throw line. So if you wipe those out, you give yourself a fighting chance. And like last year, he was number 124, shooting 61% from the free throw line. I get it. There are a lot of different builds at play here. So you punt something. Aaron Gordon, if you're punting free throws, he is now inside the top 100. Okay. If you're not punting free throws, Aaron Gordon does not support being on your fantasy team. In that case, if you're attacking all 9 categories, he's doing more harm than good. He was right around number 150 last year if you're trying to win free throws any given week. And his numbers weren't bad outside of that. 14 points, 6.5 boards, 3.5 assists, 1.4 combined defensive stats. I think the hope was that that number might be just a little bit higher. It wasn't. Last year it was at 1.6, so it's actually kind of trending the wrong way. And I think we have every reason to believe that his role stays relatively constant year over year. He was at 9.8 shots this season after 11.2 the year before. There isn't anybody that's like going away on Denver that is going to afford him more opportunity. And frankly, my hope is, and we'll segue over to Jamal Murray in a minute. My hope is that Jamal Murray is healthier this coming season, and that then makes the pathway to Aaron Gordon value even tougher. I feel like Jokic took more shots this last year. Yeah, that's a thing. So for Aaron Gordon, he's punt free throw only. And that brings us now to the 3 big names on the Nuggets before we get to the one that you guys are all kind of sitting back and waiting to find out what the hell Dan thinks of. I know. We know. All right. What about Michael Porter Jr.? This last season, he finished at number 72 in 9-cat, 16.7 points per game, 2.73, 7 boards, 1.5 assists, 1.2 combined defensive stats, and pretty solid percentages from an efficiency standpoint. 48.5 from the field, 83.5 at the free throw line. Didn't really turn the ball over either. That's good. And I can't believe that this is the case already. But I think Michael Porter Jr. is just going to be sort of like a quiet, decent producer. You know who he reminds me of? Tobias Harris. Not in like the way he moves on a basketball court, but just in the way that the numbers now bear themselves out. Tobias Harris this year was at 17.2, 6.5 boards, 3 assists, 1.7 combined defensive stats, 1.3 threes, and 48.5, 87.5 splits. We just talked about Michael Porter Jr. being almost a carbon copy on those things. Harris, a few more assists. MPJ, a few more 3-pointers. Oh, my God. That construction is so unbelievably obnoxious. Shut up back there. I hate it. I hate it so much. It never ends. So what do we do with this information on the Michael Porter Jr. side? Well, I mean, I think the end result here is he's just sort of quietly locked into this. And I don't know that we can look at him and say, oh, well, here's some areas where he can take a big step forward, because none of them is really leaping off the page as an obvious next thing for him. And I know he's not old. He's only 26. There are parts of his game that could still potentially, quote unquote, grow. But 84, almost 84% of the foul line this last year, that was the best number of his career. 48.5% from the field, not the best number of his career, but expecting him to get back to 54%, where he was that wild, explosive breakout sophomore campaign. I don't know that we can expect that, because dude shot 63% from 2 that year and 44.5% from 3. It was just an unsustainably ridiculous number. He is a good offensive player, no doubt. 41% from 3 for his career. But when you look at all the other numbers and kind of roll them together and say, okay, what can we really expect here? I think a best case scenario for Michael, okay, not best case, but a likeliest scenario, if you were going to hope he takes a small step forward, is 48.5% from the field becomes like 49.5% from the field or he makes an extra 0.5% of a 3-pointer per game. So 2.7 goes to 2.8 or 2.9. It's small stuff right around the edges, right around the periphery. And then the hope is that he stays healthy, which he did this last year, but that was kind of teetering on the first time. I guess he played 61 out of 72 games that second, the intentionally shortened COVID season, not the one that had its plug pulled on it late. And then, of course, the year after that, he played 9. So there's always going to be that stuff, the Michael Porter Jr. lower back issues hovering over whatever your decisions are with him. But if he falls down into that, I think he was getting drafted like near 80 this last year, he becomes a really easy call there in pretty much, I think, any format, because you're no longer spending a high draft pick. So if he gets hurt a little bit, your team should be able to weather that storm. And if he doesn't, he's probably just going to walk into a, clean single to right. My baseball metaphors for basketball picks. Working my way up the board, Jamal Murray finished this last year at number 33 per game in 9-cat. By all accounts, statistically, it was a truly outstanding year for Murray. From a health standpoint, however, it was not good. He didn't stay on the floor this year. Jamal played just 59 out of 82 ball games. He does tend to be a little bit banged up. And I know you can be like, Dan, what are you actually referencing with that? Well, look at his last 5 seasons at this point. COVID shortened year, he played 59 out of 72. The following year, which was also 72 games, he only played 48. Blew out his ACL at the end of that year. Did not play the following season. Came back from the catastrophic injury to play 65 out of 82 games. And then this year, where his numbers were, I would argue, the best we've seen from Murray, he played in just 59 out of 82 games. I don't know that we can expect Jamal Murray to get to 70 ball games, which makes him a really difficult player for me to say, oh, go get him in the 4th round, because I would bet most of my vast riches, I don't have vast riches, that he's going to get drafted inside the top 50. Like, it would really blow my mind if Jamal Murray fell outside of the top 50 in fantasy drafts. Just like, he's a young dude. He's exciting. He's incredible in the playoffs. So that's what everybody remembers from Jamal. He was hurt midway through these playoffs. So he saved up his heroics for just the Lakers. But you guys catch my meaning. He's not a dude that's going to fly under the radar, scoring over 20 points per game and just being a dude that people get excited about. If he can replicate this last year, you could draft him near 50 and it wouldn't completely blow up your team. But damn, the nagging injuries, all that stuff. I'm going to have a tough time not drafting Jamal if he falls to 50, because you're sitting on about a round per game of value almost right out of the chute. And then if this is some sort of like vendetta year for him, the Nuggets getting knocked out in the playoffs, Jamal having kind of a down season from a health standpoint after the championship run, maybe that's the argument to say, oh, he can kind of will himself to a better year. But I don't think the Nuggets are super worried about playoff seeding. It's not like they weren't right at the very tippy top of the Western Conference this year, despite Jamal Murray playing in only 59 ball games. They'll be fine, whether or not they're minus Nikola Jokic. But the rest of these guys, if they miss 15 to 20 games, the team will be okay, as long as it's not all of them missing 15 to 20 games. Would I take Jamal Murray in the mid-30s? Probably not. Not with the now, what I think we can call basically 5 years of injury stuff in different capacities. Mind you, they're not all the same thing, but it's a long stretch now where he hasn't really made it through a season. And I don't think he's hit 80% of his games in any of them. That's 5 years now. It's a decent body of work to make a claim like that. And then, of course, you've got Nikola Jokic, who's always going to be at the very top. There's really nothing to add there. I don't think he wants to have to take 18 shots per game. I think he felt like he needed to do a little more with Jamal Murray missing as much time as he did. If Murray's fully healthy, Jokic probably becomes a little bit more passy. But either way, he's going to be a top 3 per game fantasy guy. He is extraordinarily durable because he never leaves the floor, and he's sort of thick and cushy. I'm still very good taking Jokic number 1. I think it's an incredible way to set your team up with being like decent in points, not great for the top of the first round, but not really hurting you there. Threes is kind of the only area you fall behind a little bit with Jokic at the top of the draft, and you give yourself one of the biggest field goal percent bumps across the landscape, which I get it. Head-to-headers, half you guys are punting different percentages. I prefer not to. That's just me. But I still like Jokic at the top because, especially for Roto, you can do no wrong. And now, finally, the name that you guys, I'm sure, have been waiting for, and that name is Russell Westbrook, who was traded to the Jazz by the Clippers as part of a sign-and-trade deal, and Utah waived him for a second time, and now he's in Denver. I think category leaguers, you guys know not to mess with Westbrook. Even if he's going to step into, and we were just looking at the Nuggets numbers or minutes per game more than anything on the screen a moment ago. Last year, KCP played 31.5 minutes per game. Reggie Jackson played 22. That's basically 53, 54 minutes on the way out. And Christian Brown probably soaking up 11 of those on the way in. So that's some 40-odd minutes that are going to get redistributed among some of these other dudes. Peyton Watson likely to pick up a handful of minutes in there, I would think. I don't know what the Nuggets do around the edges, but it does leave, one would think, 20-some-odd minutes for Russell Westbrook. Which, I mean, look, he was fine for the Clippers this year. He did this with the Lakers as well. There's like one game every 3 weeks where you look and you're like, oh, Westbrook is the best player on the court right now. But then the other 11 games over those 3 weeks, he's typically doing more harm than good now. Just barreling towards the rim with an extraordinarily high turnover rate and an inability to space the floor, and just can't hit a free throw when he gets to the foul line, can't hit a jump shot, can't really make layups the way he used to. I didn't intend for this podcast to be the Russell Westbrook bagging hour, but he's just not the same player he was 3 or 4 years ago even. He's an old goat now. It happens to the best of us. He'll be 36 during this upcoming season. He's a dude that always relied on his explosive athletic ability to win basketball games, and he doesn't have that anymore. And there's not one thing that you can point at and just say, oh, this is the thing that's crumbled. Because, his 2-point field goal percent was fine last year. He shot 51% from 2, but he shot 27% from 3 and 69% at the free throw line. And his assist to turnover ratio is just a little better than 2-1 these days, where you're looking back at, the power hour days of Russ, it was more like 2.5, 3-1. He's just not the same guy. And if people are like, Dan, has he had this big drop-off in percentages? Only free throw. Because remember, early in the first 10 years of his career, he could hit foul shots. He shot 80-some-odd% at the free throw line, and then he got free throw yips in 2017, and they never went away. He had a year in Houston where he shot 76% at the foul line. I don't know what the hell that was, but other than that, over the last 8 years, 66, 66, 67, 66, 66, 69. Yay! Really jazzed it up a bit there. The allure with Westbrook is never going to be on the category league side, because even if you're punting stuff, you really need to be punting multiple things for Russ to make sense on your fantasy team, because he's a train wreck in both percentages and generally hurts you in turnovers and 3-pointers. There are basically 4 things where he's doing damage to your fantasy team whether or not he's on the court, I guess. He's always going to be someone who's pretty good at rebounding and passing, and his steals numbers have been pretty good throughout his career. Very good for some stretches, not world-beating these days. And I don't think anybody's giving him full starters minutes. And even when he did, if you're looking at the Lakers year, he was still only at 1 steal in 34 minutes a ball game. So that's another thing that's kind of tapered off here towards the end of Russ's career. Let's say Denver gives him about 24 minutes a game. I think it's conceivable that he gets up into that range. You could see counting stats pretty similar to what happened last year. 12 points, 5 boards, 4.5, 5 assists. On its face, 12, 5, and 5 sounds pretty good, but then you have to remember how truly horrible he is at three-point shooting, both percentages, and typically turnovers if the ball's in his hands as well. And I don't know what the plan is, staggering minutes or whatever, but like, is he the third ball handler on that team now? Yeesh. What about on the points league side there? Is there enough for Westbrook to be someone you even give a passing glance at in points leagues? I'd say yeah. I mean, again, provided your points leagues are de-emphasizing percentages and three-pointers the way that a lot of them do. And this may have been a good question to ask Robin Marks on yesterday's show, but forgot or didn't get around to it. Is 12, 5, and 5 enough? We're talking about like the very end of your draft. I mean, maybe. What if you run into a year again? What if Jamal Murray's hurt again? Because Reggie Jackson got a much larger minute count last year because of Jamal Murray's injuries. Does that mean Russ has some games where he plays 27, 28? Yeah, probably. Mixed in there. It'll be ugly. And teams are going to goad him into shooting instead of Michael Porter Jr., or, KCP's gone now. Floor spacing for the Nuggets yeah. So the Nuggets, I think, really, this season is going to hinge on whether Jamal Murray stays healthy. They'll win their regular season games, but in my eyes, I don't think they're going to be nearly as effective as they were last year. The KCP to Brown drop off and the Reggie Jackson to Russell Westbrook flip is probably not great. Free throws in particular become pretty damn messy when Denver was one of the best free throw shooting teams outside of Gordon for a while. So let's put a bow on the Nuggets, and then we can flip on over to the Oklahoma City Thunder for the second half of this little run of good times on the pod. Jokic, you're taking number 1. Number 2, Wemby, Luka, whatever. All those guys are up there depending on your format. Jamal Murray, because of the risk of missed games, you probably hope that he falls towards 50. Michael Porter Jr., I would assume he goes near 75, just kind of like where he was last year, and I'm totally fine with that. Aaron Gordon, you're only drafting if you're punting free throws, in which case you could probably take him around 100, or I don't know how far he would fall in drafts, but look, he's not going to get inside the top 100 if you're not punting anything. And then Russell Westbrook, no, you're not doing it in category leagues. You can thank me later on that one. He'll have a game in there where he goes for 20 and like 8 and 7, and everybody's gonna be like, "Oh, it's Russ time," and then people are gonna point and laugh, and then I'm gonna be like, "Yeah, you got to look at the whole year, friends, if you really want to know what's going on in these parts." Remember, folks, please, while you're hanging out, please like and subscribe to the podcast. Follow me on Twitter at Dan Vespris and help us move this locomotive forward. This is part 2 of the show. We're now talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder, who I don't know that either of these teams is what you'd call like a traditionally complicated fantasy team to handicap. But the Thunder did have some changes. So at least that was a thing, where with Denver, like KCP was not a guy that was moving the needle all that much anyway. He was sort of your boring plotter type, which, again, he serves a purpose, and I think he'll be better in Orlando even. But he served a purpose. But for Denver, no one is about to step into fantasy value. With the Thunder, we've got some stuff to sort out because Josh Giddey is out, and that's kind of the only obvious contributor on this team that's not there anymore. And, some of the lower minute guys might be here or there. It doesn't matter. And the Thunder brought in Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein. So let's talk about the guys that are the main holdovers on the Thunder. The main holdovers, the guys that played the big minutes, are Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The Thunder were an extraordinarily fun fantasy team for those 3 guys. Jalen Williams got off to a slow start. He was one of the easiest buy low recommendations in the history of fantasy basketball. Power boosted his way up the board after that first, I think it was like a month where he was in the 90 range, something like that. Obviously didn't last. Later on in the season, what was Jalen Williams' second half of the year? I think he was inside the top 35. And that's kind of where I expect him to land. I'm not super concerned about somebody taking his minutes. I don't know that anybody's about to take his role. And that's one of the things that makes the Thunder situation a little bit less complicated, is that the guys they brought in are not going to take shots or usage away from the guys that are already there. What they might take away is a little bit of playing time. And what Hartenstein is definitely going to take away is the middle of the floor. But again, let's start with Jalen Williams. He was number 42 last year. There's every reason to believe that he'll be that good or better this coming season. Maybe the field goal percent ticks down from 54. Maybe you see the steals come back up to 1.2 or 1.3. Like I mentioned a moment ago, he was inside the top 35 most of the year after that slow start. And I'm totally comfortable drafting him towards the end of the third, beginning of the fourth round. Any later than that, and then you're just creating additional value. But, like we've talked about, you want guys that are going to be pretty damn close to their mark. Obviously, if you can find somebody that blows past it, great. And I guess that concept requires a 30-second explanation. I'm not saying I'm targeting Jalen Williams at that spot. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if your prime targets, if you have pick 38, I don't know, beginning of the fourth round, something like that, or he probably ends up going sooner than that. Let's say you have like pick 35 towards the end of the third round, and all the guys that you thought have a chance to jump up to top 20 are gone. At that point, I'm very comfortable saying, go ahead and take Jalen Williams. He's probably going to sit around number 35 to 40, 30 to 40, something 30 to 45, whatever. That's fine. If he's healthy and he rolls at that mark and you drafted him at 35, that's fine. He doesn't become a league winner, true, but he also doesn't burn your fantasy team down. Let's talk Shea for a second also. Shea was number 2 this last year per game. I believe that's where he also finished by totals, played in 75 out of 82 games. I expect him to try to play whenever he can again this following season. The Thunder, he's young enough and they're not in like, we can coast regular season mode yet. I mean, maybe they get there. But Shea, 34 minutes a game, 30 points per game, 1.3 threes, 5.5 rebounds, 6.2 assists, 2 steals, 0.9 blocks, high volume, massive percentages booster. And I think that might be why people, I don't want to say undervalue Shea, but it's probably why he's going to go 4th in that group at the very top. That's my assumption, at least, is that people are going to look at Shea and say, the Thunder, they're getting better around him. Maintaining 2.9 combined defensive stats, that's probably kind of hard. And you know what? All that might be true, but I love starting my team with a guy that puts me in pole position in both percentages. I can get my 3-pointers a little bit later on. I don't think that I have to get 2.5 3-pointers in my first round pick. If I'm getting 30 points and 5.5 boards and 6.2 assists, you get off to a very good scoring start, a little behind in threes. You're not getting the 10 rebound or 9 assist guy. That's also true. And they just sort of make sure that you have decent numbers in those things as you work your way through the board. I realize, especially in head-to-head, sometimes it's easier to lean into guys that are hyper elite in 4 or 5 things or whatever at the top of the board. Whereas Shea is hyper elite in scoring and steals, which have a lot of variance, and the percentages, which a lot of folks are not eyeballing super hard, and he doesn't have very high turnovers. So he makes more sense perhaps on the roto side, just in terms of like the foundational building block, but he very much belongs in the top 4, and that's where he's going to go this year. You can take him anywhere in that group. Again, I don't think I would take him over Jokic. Certainly not in roto. Maybe on perhaps in roto you could make an argument for Shea over Wemby or over Luka head-to-head. I don't think you can make that same argument because those guys are more the definition of the having the super elite categories. To be determined. Let's talk Chet Holmgren for a minute. I think he's one of the more interesting names on the OKC side, and we're seeing him go in the second round in most of the early mocks that are taking place right now. Holmgren last year, 16.5 was the scoring, 1.5 threes, 8 boards, 2.5 assists, 2.3 blocks, 0.6 steals, 53-79 were the splits, only 1.6 turnovers. I'm not really... And bear in mind, of course, that Holmgren was our lone young, take a shot guy on the old man squad last year. He was one of our targets, and he was a massive, massive win. But you also kind of have to know when to cash in with stuff like this. And I think we cashed in last year on Holmgren. Because when you think about the additions to the team, most notably Isaiah Hartenstein, anytime that those two guys are on the floor together, it pushes Holmgren away from the bucket just by nature on offense. On defense, it also probably pushes him out a little bit, as we saw, someone more like a Karl Anthony Towns. Rudy Gobert came in, and it's like, look, one of you guys is going to have to guard the 4. It's probably going to have to be the slightly smaller whatever. Not that Holmgren is short or anything, but Hartenstein is a thicker dude, and Holmgren is the younger, longer one. So he's probably going to be doing a little bit more of the chasing. They'll have a nice thing going on where they can kind of cover each other's backs. The rim will almost always be left protected for the Thunder. That's a good thing. But my thought process here is, even if Holmgren is the starting center, even if we say Hartenstein's coming off the bench after they gave him $30 million a year, he might come off the bench. They're not going to only give those dudes center minutes. They're not paying Hartenstein $30 million to play 18 backup center minutes a game. They're just not. He's going to play 24 minutes or more, and 6, at least, of those minutes are going to have to come alongside Chet Holmgren. And every minute that those two guys play together, and it's not going to be as earth-shattering as Cat's numbers when Gobert came in, because those took a nosedive, his rebounding, his blocks, his field goal percent, all that stuff, because he just had to move away from the bucket pretty much the whole time he's on the damn court. It won't be quite that severe, because a lot of Holmgren's minutes are going to be coming without Hartenstein. I don't know how many exactly, but plenty. But there's going to be time together. There has to be. What do we think? 6 out of Holmgren's 30 minutes? 8 out of his 30 minutes? 25%? Something in that neck of the woods. So just take a quarter to a third of Holmgren's minutes and adjust them for what you'd expect he'd do at power forward instead. So it's not a big thing, but I also don't see a super clear path for Chet to take another step forward. Could he become like an 85% foul shooter year over year? I guess that's the way that this sort of blows up in my face. But I don't think they're about to force feed him an extra 2 shots per game or something like that. I guess Josh Giddey being gone, but I think a lot of his stuff is going to go to guys like Dort and Wallace and Isaiah Joe and all these guys that they gave extensions to. Wallace, Joe, I think Wiggins got an extension if I'm remembering right. I don't think that stuff just goes to Chet Holmgren. I think a lot of that stuff actually probably goes to Caruso and Hartenstein, who we haven't even talked about yet. Well, what kind of a drop-off does that actually mean for Holmgren? Again, I'm not talking about like a significant drop the way that we saw with Cat, because for Cat, most of his minutes are played with Gobert. They do try to stagger them a bit, but they're going to start the game together, and they're going to close the game together. And so you're talking like at least half of Cat's minutes are at the 4. It's not going to be like that with Chet. Half his minutes are not going to be at the 4. But again, you could see 25, 30% of them at the 4. It's not nothing. So even if he does take a small step forward in some stuff, I think you're going to see that step backward in just being a power forward instead. Holmgren finished number 19 last year. He's not one of my favorite second-round targets. I could also point at the discussion we had on this podcast a month and a half ago with Matt Smith, who talked about how risky it is to concentrate your draft picks early on high shot block guys. I think there's every reason to believe that Chet Holmgren is going to block 2 shots or more a game this coming year, but God forbid that number comes down to like 1.8. His value really drops off with it, because that's Holmgren's biggest impact positive category, where field goal percent is a small positive and rebounds is a small positive, and everything else was pretty freaking close to the midpoint, other than, I guess, steals was a little below it. Although for a center, his steals were fine. Do you want to spend a first or second round pick on someone whose value is so heavily tied up in one category? I don't think I do. The Holmgren stat profile is unicorny, frankly, more like JJJ than Porzingis. But we saw what happened with JJJ when things pivoted the wrong way. Holmgren's field goal percent isn't gonna drop by 9 percentage points or whatever. But could the blocks go the wrong way? They could. Do I expect the rebounds to go up with Hartenstein around? I definitely don't. Do I think the scoring goes up? Maybe. That's probably the hope. So I think I probably don't end up with a whole lot of Chet Holmgren on my teams this year. And I know that the second round is going to end up being filled with landmines like always. And so it's possible that at like pick 21, if you're like, well, Chet's there, I think he's going to finish top 30. So, okay, fine. That wouldn't be the worst thing in the world because of the complications of the second round. But in my eyes, at least the first 18 to 20 picks, I think you can find guys that are trending either up or maybe more safely up. What about the new guys? The new guys, that's probably the most fun thing to think about for the Thunder. Let's start with Hartenstein, who we did cover on a podcast a few weeks ago when he initially signed. Isaiah Hartenstein is interesting, and I'll admit I don't have a clue where he's going to get drafted this year, because Hartenstein had three very distinct personalities this last season in New York. He had, I'm the backup to Mitchell Robinson. He had, I'm the man. And he had, my Achilles hurts. Those are the 3 phases of Isaiah Hartenstein this season. And they were so very, very different. As Mitchell Robinson's backup, Hartenstein barely got to play. He's playing 18 to 20 minutes a ball game. He didn't look particularly engaged in what was going on. I can triple check myself on this, but I don't think he was inside the top 150 at that point. He was number 211. Playing 17 minutes a ball game, 5.5 points, 5 boards. Did have a steal, interestingly, in his 17 minutes. And then Mitchell Robinson went down, and Hartenstein became a freaking wrecking crew for about 2 months. I think it was like right up to around the trade deadline, if I'm remembering the general path of it. He played about 30 minutes a ball game. He was number 46 over that stretch. I think there were moments in there where he was even rolling better at 8 points, 11 boards, 2.5 assists, 2.8 defensive stats, 64, 72 field goal free throw. That's a beautiful thing. Overall, and this is kind of where things simplify themselves for us. Overall on the year, Isaiah Hartenstein averaged out to 25 minutes per game. Interesting. Isn't that about the number of minutes that a few moments ago I said he's likely to play in Oklahoma City? I think that's a pretty fair estimate for him. I don't know that there's a way that the Thunder can shoehorn Hartenstein into more than 25, 26 minutes a game. It just, from a spacing standpoint and just a Chet Holmgren standpoint, now suddenly I mean, if Hartenstein's getting up near 30 minutes a game, now you're talking about a situation where almost half of Holmgren's minutes are at the 4, and that team goes from being one of the fastest floor spacey running teams to kind of lumbering. But with 18 backup center minutes and another 7 or 8 alongside Holmgren, then things don't slow down quite so much. You also get that Hartenstein bruising ability that they simply didn't have last year. Thunder were not good at taking care of the defensive glass. I mean, offensive glass, they could attack a little bit more here. They just needed a body. They needed a big body, and they got a good one. In 25 minutes a game this year, Hartenstein averaged 8 and 8 with 2.5 assists, 2.3 defensive stats, 64.5% from the field, only 5 shots a game, mind you, and 71% at the free throw line. It was good enough for top 75 value in 9-cat. And I think that's probably a reasonable target for him this year, where the upside is built into, can the Thunder figure out a way to get him more, or does Chet Holmgren miss a few weeks at some point this season? Because he really didn't last year. Chet was extraordinarily healthy in his now actual rookie season. My concern on Hartenstein is not whether he's going to put up some fantasy value. I think he'll do that. My concern is whether people are going to draft him as if he's the starting center with no one trying to take any of that cheese, like the New York version without Mitchell Robinson, the 30-minute per game Hartenstein, where he was easily a top 50 play. He was awesome for that stretch. But I don't think he gets there this year. And we have to sort of hold those two thoughts in our head at the same time, which is, I think he's going to be good. I think he'll be a late 6th, early 7th kind of fantasy player. Round pick, I should say. But I'm also worried that he's going to, the amazing stretch he went on last year with New York is going to push his number on draft day up into the late 4th, early 5th. And I'm simply not willing to go that high with him when there's, I mean, look, I'm not a huge fan of Rudy Gobert, not as much as the next guy, but he was number 50 this last year, and he'll play starters minutes. I would rather have a center that I know is going to get starters minutes as opposed to one where there is a little bit of a question mark on whether it's going to be 22 or 24 or 26 or 28 minutes a ball game. We don't know yet what that final number is going to be for Hartenstein. I think we can make a pretty accurate hypothesis and say something in the 24 to 26 neighborhood, but we don't know. And even if they say it, we still don't know until they do it. One more player to talk about on today's show, and that is, I'd love to call him friend of the program. He's a player that I want to be a friend of the program, and that's Alex Caruso. Maybe the best waiver wire ad of last year. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, what about Jalen Johnson? He was drafted late in most of the leagues I was in. Because most of the leagues I was in, people were reading, like the B150 had him relatively high. I can't remember what other lists had him higher. I did pick him up in one league, and it was the perfect place too. It was in a keeper league of all spots. So I get to keep Jalen Johnson at like a 14th round price for this coming year. Oh, baby. But he was drafted in a lot of spots. Alex Caruso was drafted pretty much no place. Because, frankly, for good reason, nobody believed that he was going to be able to do enough or stay healthy enough. He was helped out by the fact that Zach LaVine played a month and then was done for the year. And then the Bulls were sort of dropping like flies as the season went on. Patrick Williams only played half the year also. But the Bulls also realized that having Caruso on the floor was kind of their only chance to win a basketball game on a given night. And so they continued to make sure he was on the floor. Alex Caruso also turned himself into a pretty viable offensive player. shooting 41% from downtown on the highest volume he's ever taken from three-point land at 4.7 tries per ball game. His effective field goal percent this year was 59%, far and away the best mark of his career, partially because of the improved three-point shooting, also partially because, and he's done this for 2 years in a row now, his two-pointers have been pretty freaking close to the rim. He's shot 56% from two each of the last 2 seasons in a row to get his overall field goal percent up to 46 and then 47%. But that's not the appeal on Caruso. That's only part of the appeal on Caruso because he's not a great foul shooter for 76%. Basically, you're just hoping that he doesn't do a whole lot of damage to you in percentages, and I think we can assume that'll be true. The looks he gets in Oklahoma City will be probably even better than the looks he was getting in Chicago. What Caruso does for your fantasy team is mostly 3-and-D. He hit 2 3-pointers a game and 2.7 combined defensive stats this past year. He is going to get passed over in every head-to-head league from here to Kalamazoo because he scored 10 points per ball game and he grabbed 4 boards per ball game, and everybody looks at the counting stats and wants to see at least one of them that looks big. No such dice for Mr. Caruso. He doesn't score that much. He doesn't rebound that much. His passing was actually fine at 3.5 a ball game, but again, it's not going to pop the lid off. If he got over 4, I think people might give him like a cursory second glance. But here's the thing. He fits perfectly in what the Thunder want to do. He fits perfectly. Josh Giddey got phased out. He wasn't really playing that much anyway. There's a spot for Caruso to drop in and play kind of a similar role to what he was doing in Chicago. I don't know if he can get up to 28 minutes per ball game. That was where he's at 29 actually with Chicago this last year. That is a pretty hard number to get to. But the Thunder are going to realize quickly what Chicago realized quickly, and the Lakers knew but didn't capitalize on by letting him walk. That's the dumbest move ever. The teams that have Alex Caruso are freaking better when he's on the floor. Caruso and Dort and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a devastating defensive trio. You could play those guys as your quote-unquote backcourt. Shai, a giant point guard. Caruso at the 2. Dort at the 3. And you go Jalen Williams at the 4 or Dort at the 4, whatever. Jalen Williams is an amazing defender also, and Holmgren at the 5. Much like with Hartenstein, we don't know the exact number of minutes that Caruso is going to get. And they may try to keep him in the 25 range to try to keep him upright. Because Caruso did get through 71 games this year, but boy, every time he plays starters minutes for a couple of weeks in a row, you know that other shoe's about to drop. Yep, that makes me nervous. I'll admit to that. Will I draft Alex Caruso? Hell yeah, I'll draft Alex Caruso because I don't think you're going to have to do it until like pick 125. And at that point, why the hell not? If he gets to 26, 27 minutes, he'll still be inside the top 100. And with the hope that he can do something even remotely similar to what he was doing last year, at least on a per-minute basis, having Alex Caruso late allows you to make small tweaks early in, okay, maybe I can get a guard who's not quite as good at steals. Maybe I can get a big man who's not quite as good at blocking shots because I'm going to pick up this wing, 3-and-D wing later on in my fantasy draft who's going to shore up these categories. And he's going to come super cheap, and we know he's awesome at basketball. So yes, I would strongly consider Alex Caruso with a late round pick. I would also suggest that you guys consider doing the same. And that is our show here on this lovely Wednesday. Went a little bit longer than expected, but I think that's maybe not longer than expected, just longer than usual, but to be expected when you're trying to cover a couple of teams per show. And that's what we've done today. We're now up to 9 out of 30 teams covered as we continue our countdown to the maybe Yahoo opening league release date. I'll get Dan Titus back on the show in early August, and maybe he can give us the official final day, but he did say maybe August 8th. So stay tuned. Please take a moment here at the end of the program to follow me on Twitter at Dan Vespers, at Old Man Squad, also on social media. Like, subscribe, and please drop that rating and review over on iTunes, Spotify, whatever service you're listening to it on. Let your friends know where old Dano is hanging out these days, and we will do it again tomorrow. I think we're going to cover 2 more teams. Finish up the Northwest Division. I think we're missing the Jazz, and then we'll embark upon Southwest, apparently. Okay, whatever. We need to think about some division naming. We all need to have a chat. Okay, that's it for today. See you guys soon.